Black the Name by D.B. Halpert. Narrated by the author, D.B. Halpert. Chapter 15. New Plans. So, you go to that building right there and talk to the man inside, Astor. He will get you started on the construction of a travel contract. An unexpectedly soft, mid-pitched voice presses out of the large man for Pearl to overhear while approaching, his muscular, tanned, hairy arm, glistening from moist sea air, points to a small shack a short way down the dock area. With the information provided, Elizabeth gives a nod to the gentleman, expressing a soft "thank you" before walking in the direction of the shack. Quickly, Pearl finds her way to Elizabeth's side, drawing a quick deal of attention from passers-by with her fishy appearance. Walking with her young companion, Pearl asks, "So what are you up to?" "Getting ship passage." "Well, it will be difficult. Sailing to Blackgate is supposedly prohibited," Pearl explains, putting her hands behind her head. A smile expands across Elizabeth's face as she comes to understand that her words swayed Pearl. At the same moment that the words find their end between the two about their discussion in the tavern, the door of the small shack stops them. Opening the door, the two women step inside, and closing it behind them, they take in with surprise the spacious feeling in the very cramped space. 3 desks, each with an older man sitting behind them, stand next to the outer walls of the room. In the center area, taken by empty chairs across from each of the older men, in a yellow and teal square rug. Stepping to the empty chair across from the man sat at the desk in the back of the room, and gesturing for Elizabeth to join her, Pearl takes a seat and, leaning back in the chair, nearly falls over when the man, without looking up from his pile of parchment, asks, in a growling, greasy voice of a man who was once a sailor, "Name?" Pearl rests the front legs of the chair back on the floor, blinking her eyes in surprise at the quick response to her approach. "I'm sorry." Looking up, the man's face rests expressionless as he dips his quill into the jar of ink to his side without looking. Mostly bald, with a deep, leathery suntan, the man's white, thin comb-over grows down on either side of his face into a large, bushy mutton chops that would hide his ears if he were human, instead appearing as hair clouds for his long, elvish ears to pierce from. The blank expression holds itself on the man's face as he reiterates, "What is your name?" "Pearl Sarya," Pearl says, almost in an exclamation, with a laugh of embarrassment with the question's clarification. "Destination?" the man's voice continues, his question accompanied by the ear-curling sound of silence broken only by the scratching of quill on parchment. Elizabeth looks around, amazed, the loud sounds of the dock outside to be non-existent within the small building, and Pearl responds, "Blackgate." At that instant, the other 2 older men look up from their work, and the man in front of Pearl and Elizabeth changes his expression to hold discontent for their presence. The response isn't a loud yell like would be expected from his expression. Instead, it holds the same melodic tone. "It is currently illegal for anyone to sail to or receive a vessel from the port of the Broken Isle, Blackgate." To this, Elizabeth steps between Pearl and the man, drawing the expressionless gaze to her, and she asks in an almost whimper, "Sir, do you know how we could find a way to get there? We have been lost for some time and only found our way here to hear about Blackgate recently. We just want to get home." Almost mechanically, the other two men slam the ledgers sat in front of them closed and stand, leaving, before they call back in similar emotionless, groaning voices, "We are going on break, Eric." With the two out of the room, the man called Eric lets his expression rest, falling from the stern official look into one of a father looking a little girl in the face that, for all he knows, could simply be trying to get back to her own father, and with a sigh, placing his hand on his head to slick back the comb over, he responds, "As I said, you can't get there legally, but that doesn't mean you can't get there at all. If it is that important to you, there may be a captain that would, for the right price, take you there regardless of the rules. Go to the leaky vessel and ask for Esmeralda. That is all I can do for you. Sorry I can't help more, dear." Tilting her head to the side just slightly and closing her eyes with a big smile, Elizabeth exclaims cheerfully, keeping herself composed, "Thank you." And she turns, stepping from the building. Pearl looks in surprise at the exchange, and standing from the chair, nearly tips when her foot catches one of the legs as she hurriedly makes her way to Elizabeth's side, calling back to the man as they leave, "Yeah, thanks." Aldrin sits mug in hand, sipping occasionally at the alcoholic brown liquid within, mumbling to himself profanities and complaints about Pearl's stubbornness. In the quiet onslaught of slurs, Aubin returns, taking a seat next to his frustrated companion, asking, "Say, based on the mug and the mumbling, I'm guessing we aren't then the smart choice." Aldrin's defeated look intensifies, and with a sigh, his shoulders slump with his response, "No, Pearl thinks she's fine, and those two are right. There are people there that I need to go try to protect. I mean, that is technically my job as a member of the Black Watch." "Whatever. As long as I get to get home within this and said and then." The thick gag-inducing stench of sea brine, spoiled vomit, and ale seeps from the warped, rotting door in front of Elizabeth and Pearl. With a cautious hand, Pearl grabs the handle, and with a strong tug that is inhibited by her base desire on not contracting anything from the rusty knob, pulls the door free of the frame where it was stuck due to the warping wood's bend. Through the open path, the two girls are accosted with another waft of the sickening smell mixed with the stiff fragrance of day-old fish stew that, for Pearl's, smells surprisingly appetizing. Stepping through the tavern, which seats only a handful of strangers, a pitiful gathering compared to the salty sea hags crowded at this hour, Pearl and Elizabeth find their way to the bar. Seeing no one tending to the area, Pearl leans over to see if the barkeep is working on the lower parts of the beer trough, and she finds a small man, only 3 feet in height, but proportioned like a full-grown human, walking from one end of the bar in her direction. Seeing Pearl leaning over his counter, the man points, shouting at her in what must be a deep, gravelly voice for his species. What are you doing leaning over my bar and such? Don't you be in know any manners?" Apparently, immediately, Pearl throws herself back to find the man standing on a stool on the other side of the bar, bringing himself almost eye level with her as she responds. Sorry, I couldn't see you there. We are looking for a person, Miss Esmeralda? With a squinting forest green eyes, the man points to a booth where a figure lays with their feet kicked up onto the table, sleeping. That one over there. If ye can't wake her up, you will color me surprised. The man jumps from the stool, returning to what he was doing before grumbling about lazy and inconsiderate women. Pearl steps from the counter, leading Elizabeth to the table, where, kicked back, asleep and snoring loudly, a woman in a sailor's outfit not too dissimilar from Pearl's, only trading the blue for grays, lay with her feet kicked up on the table next to a half-empty mug. With a soft push, Pearl slides the woman's feet from the table, causing them to slam onto the wooden floor, threatening to break the rot-infested wood with their force, and throwing up the woman's head, launching her hat, which covered her face, into the booth opposite her. In the same instant, her head rises, so too does the stranger's fist, pulled back in a clenched ball, drawing ready to throw a punch, while she growls, All right, which bastard is getting their nose reshaped? Seeing Pearl and Elizabeth, the woman's eyes roll in their sockets as she groans and releases her fist, choosing to grab the half-filled mug and take a swig. Elizabeth edges in between Pearl and the stranger with her arms up non-threateningly, and she explains, We are sorry for waking you. We just wanted to ask about you taking us to Blackgate. With the large, calloused hand setting down the mug, the woman rubs her eyes, groaning in response. It's illegal to sail to Blackgate. Pearl picks the trifold hat up from the booth and offering it to the woman explains. We know. That is why we are talking to you. With intrigue in the strangers that woke her, growing, Esmeralda's brow peaks, and offering the booth across from her waits for the ladies to sit before asking. And why is it that two delicate flowers such as yourselves would be wishing to knowingly break the law to go to a hellhole like Blackgate? Pearl looks almost insulted at the comment, but before she can respond in kind, Elizabeth speaks. We want to get home and see what we can do to help the people there. Crossing her surprisingly muscular yet feminine arms with Elizabeth's words, Esmeralda gives a knowing nod, saying, Well, then you came to the right person, but there is only one complication. Complication? Pearl and Elizabeth ask in unison. I don't have a ship. Well, not yet. I have one lined up, but I'm still shy of the purchasing cost. Well, we weren't expecting a free voyage. How much are you down? Perhaps we can help as our payment for the transport, Pearl explains with a shrug. They want an equivalent value of 3,000 of this continent's gold coins, Esmeralda explains, almost bashfully, continuing. Or at least 3,000 more coins beyond what I've already invested. Eyes wide, Pearl needs Elizabeth to shake her back into reality, asking, Is that a lot? Yeah, Pearl responds before turning back to Esmeralda, explaining, We will see what we can do. Well, you know where to find me if you want to put money towards this venture. With that, Pearl and Elizabeth stand and leave the leaky vessel. A short time later, the two find their way back through the doors of the Salty Sea Hag, finding Aldrin and Auburn, with an arm each around the other, swaying as they both take a swig of the dirt-brown grog.
Stepping to their inebriated companions, Pearl sets her hand on Aldrin's shoulder, getting his attention, and says joyfully, "Hey, I've got us a voyage to Blackgate." His speech slurred. Aldrin responds, asking, "That's great. When is it that we ship off?" Poking her fingers together, Pearl bashfully explains, "Well, the date isn't set yet. The captain still needs to buy the ship. And we kind of said we would help pay the 3,000 gold cost." In a sudden instant of sobriety, Aldrin's eyes widen in anger. "You what?" "I mean, it's not that big of a deal. We just have to see if we can do the hero thing for the people in this town a couple of times. I mean, the notice board we passed in the city square had high gold values on several of the jobs." "At least waiting to get on a death trap or time. We'll be a wheel spent killing rats in the basements." Auburn interrupts, standing from his stool, sliding a key from the counter and presented to him by Gretchen. The red man makes his way to and up the stairs, waving to his companions. "We'll deal with your antics in the morning." Pearl and Elizabeth shoot each other an inquisitive look, having been just outside and knowing the sun to still be high in the sky. When Aldrin groans once more, "Auburn is right. We just got to town with an inn and ale. For the first time in very long, I am going to go to bed and leave the job to getting us tasks to complete to you. While you do that, I need to see if this town has a place I can get what I need for some more black powder." With his piece said in a slurry of alcohol-sodden speech, Aldrin follows Auburn's example, sliding the other key from the counter and stumbling drunkenly up the stairs. Covering her mouth with one hand, Elizabeth cannot help but giggle as she watches her friends sway and stomp up the stairs. Pearl leans onto the counter, getting Gretchen's attention, with her male companions gone, and after a few seconds, the sturdy woman steps over, leaning into Pearl, asking, "What do you need, dear?" "Nothing, just wanted to know how much each of them had." Pearl shrugs. "Oh, just a couple of mugs apiece." "I have to ask, where did you find the red one?" "It's a long story, Gretchen. I will tell you everything after closing tonight," Pearl responds, turning from the counter and stepping to the stairs, grabbing 2 buckets from the corner and calling for Elizabeth to follow. "Lizzie, get 2 mugs of water and follow me." The two deliver a bucket and a glass of water to each of their inebriated companions' rooms, and after only a few minutes in the salty sea hag, they once more step out onto the docks and into the crowd that flows through the streets. Eventually, the two find their way back to the place Pearl saw the notices as she pushed through the crowd earlier. And there, standing as its own structure, is a board, like a single walled building with a peaked roof and wood shutters to reduce the amount of damage which could come to the notices in the case of a storm. Pearl and Elizabeth are alone in the action of stepping to the notice board, the crowd around them flowing past it with complete disinterest. The parchments nailed to it all appearing at least a month weathered, with one in particular with 2 of the small information tags at its bottom missing that looks more than 2 years old. For nearly an hour, the two strangers to this town stand at the board, converting the different job offerings to memory. The one that offers the greatest reward, a promise of 1,000 gold, is written in one of the newer pieces of parchment, barely weathered by nature. The blue-black ink is reflective, almost as though it is still wet, and the strange pink stain is splattered across the page from the top right corner, almost reaching the bottom left. The calligraphic penmanship dances across the page, explaining the need of an alchemist who is having his materials stolen by rats, and his desire to have the rodents either exterminated or relocated, so as to have them no longer impeding his work. The same name which signs the notice, Alfredo Jap Alch, short for alchemist, appears as well as the signature on the oldest of the notices. Dirtied, the oldest notice appears to have been placed on this board before the shutters were installed, having suffered a deal of water damage from what can only be assumed to have been past rainstorms. The bottom of the notice is frayed, with several segments perforated for easy removal, each of which had written on it what can be assumed to have been an address, which has been smudged by water damage, two of which are missing. The same strange blue-black glistening ink scrawls across the parchment, explaining in the detail that can be obtained from the words that haven't been smudged by rain that the alchemist has an assortment of new concoctions he wishes to test on humanoid participants in order to determine whether or not they produce their intended effect. An offer of 50 gold coins per participant is offered at the bottom of the parchment, where it barely avoided a splotch of water damage. Gathering the necessary knowledge of a handful of other jobs, such as one for a Victor Ambrose who has lost his lucky coin, and one for the city port needing assistance with the repair and installment of a diving bell a few hours from the coast, Elizabeth and Pearl begin their way back to the Salty Sea Hag, with the sun beginning to make its way onto the westward horizon. Morning comes with golden rays that pierce through the windows of the rooms of the Salty Sea Hag, waking slowly the group from their beds where they rest. Pearl and Elizabeth meet each other in the hall as they step down to have some breakfast and to wait for the other two to join them. After another hour, the two are greeted by Aldrin with his hand placed firmly on his forehead, carrying with him the mug of water, already half drunk. Sitting with his companions, Aldrin takes a sliver of the steamed pork that sits in front of Pearl, asking, "So, what did you two do after I was out?" Pearl smiles, leaning back in her chair, too proud to care about Aldrin stealing from her breakfast, explaining, "With a combination of tasks from the notice board and what we already have in the way of finances, I believe we should be able to pay for the 3,000 after just a couple of days. How do you feel about risking your body for science?" A skeptical, squinting look forms in Aldrin's eyes, stopping him from just before he can bite into the warm meat. "What do you mean?" Pearl falls forward, slapping the table. At the same moment, the front chair legs clap with the wooden floor, exclaiming to Aldrin's dismay, "Now, don't be a worrywart. It's only a little sampling of unknown concoctions without an inkling of knowledge of what each concoction may do, and getting paid for it." Wincing from the loud barrage of noise emanating from Pearl, Aldrin rubs his temples, groaning, "No. So I hope you have other options." Pearl jokingly sighs, rolling her eyes, responding, "Yeah, there were some boring jobs like rat hunting and bell building." "Good. When Auburn gets down here, we'll head out. The same moment his name is invoked, Auburn steps to Aldrin's side from the stairs asking, "What are we doing?" To which Elizabeth, standing from her seat and grabbing the last handful of pork, responds, "Rat hunting." And turning to the door, she gives but a second after her initial comment, before a continuation, "Probably in the sewers." To which Pearl jumps in, "But we need to go talk to this Alfredo Jap to inform him we are working on the contract," before she grabs herself a handful of meat and joins Elizabeth.